Welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Braxton Hunter, and I am so honored that you chose to take some time out of your schedule to spend a little bit of it with us as we talk about some things that I think are very important in the world right now. And if you're American, particularly important to the nation in which you live. We're going to be talking about some political matters, but from a Christian perspective. We have two professing Christians on today, and they'll be talking about the question of how should Christians view Donald Trump's first 2 months in office. This is sort of a follow-up discussion to a debate that these two guys had before the election. I think it was just before the election, on whether, who a Christian should vote for in the presidential election. And so now we're going to follow that up and take a look at what has happened since then. A lot has happened. Some people have changed their views as a result of what happened. And so we're going to discuss that from a Christian perspective. But I want to say, as the host of this channel, as we get started, that, and this is not some meaningless caveat, this is, to me, vitally important, is that we understand that we are not a part of just the city of men. We are a part of the city of God, those of us who are believers. And that city has no borders. It has no particular geographic location. It has no one skin color. It has no one language. And it's our brothers and sisters who are a part of the faith worldwide, globally. And those people, that group of people, that nation of people is one that owes our Lord Jesus, who is our King, our deference in the highest authority. And where our nations may come into conflict with what our King has to say, we want to defer to our King. But having said that, we do live in nations and kingdoms in this world, and Christians might wonder how we should feel about political matters that are happening around us and what leaders we should support. And so I find this to be vitally important, as long as we keep in mind that there is that higher calling to obey King Jesus. With that said, I'd like to introduce the two men that are going to be chatting here today. We're going to have with us here Josh Klein, who is in the middle. And then on the far right-hand side of the screen, we have Randall Rauser. Randall Rouser is an academic who has served as a professor and also has debated on many platforms, including the very popular modern day debate platform that's out there. And then also we should mention he's been on Unbelievable Christian Radio with Justin Brierley. That's kind of, Randall, that's like, you have to do that if you're going to be an apologist. You have to go on Justin Brierley's show at some point. And Josh Klein works with Tim Stratton at Free Thinking Ministries, which is also a very academically interested outlet that produces a lot of material related to Christian philosophy, apologetics, theology, but also Josh and Tim have been very outspoken on political matters. And so this is going to make, I think, for a really good and robust discussion. So Randall, first I'll go to you. Welcome to the show. Is there anything that you would like to say at the outset that maybe I left out that you'd like to say?
I just want to see if I can get my computer camera to work. There we go. It's kind of just a little too blurry, but hopefully, even if my camera doesn't work, hopefully my arguments work. We'll say that.
Maybe your points will be clearer than your visuals are.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, it's just great to be with you, Brax, and Josh as well. We were just commenting before we got going about some of the comments already being posted, some of them a little bit vitriolic, perhaps. So I would just like to emphasize our common shared faith and the fact that you can personally like people that you disagree with on political, social, theological matters. And that's just something to kind of reiterate, I think, at the beginning.
That's helpful, Randall. Thank you for that. And Josh, is there anything you'd like to say or clarify before we begin?
I'd just like to echo what Randall said. Actually, I'm going to say I hate you, Randall. I'm just kidding. I don't hate you. I've had some pleasant interactions with you. Clearly, we have broad differences in how we view the world in a lot of ways, but we both see Jesus Christ as our Savior, and so that's what ties us together. So let's have this conversation. That's what I'd say.
All right. So the way this is going to be structured is we're going to give each person up to 8 minutes to present kind of an opening statement. And then after that, we will go into opening dialogue for an hour and a half. That's the plan. We may have time for question and answer at the end, so get your questions ready. But if you don't, then I'm sorry about that. We'll let it slip by, and maybe we can come and get those questions in a later date. We didn't really talk, or if we did, I missed it, about who was going to present first. Did we talk about that and I just missed that?
Nope.
Okay.
I just assumed you'd choose.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how about this? Since Randall might be working with his camera to try and get that fixed, why don't I just let Josh go first, and maybe in the interim, Randall can work on his camera. So, Josh, I will start the timer as soon as you begin speaking.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Braxton, and thanks for having the dialogue, Randall. I appreciate it. Interestingly, this is not a topic that I'm overly excited to discuss, although I do talk a lot about political topics. I do have an interest in politics, foreign policy, all those sorts of things. It's kind of been a hobby of mine for a lot of years, but I like to address theological issues. And in a sense, this is a theological issue because a lot of the political has become theological. So the question that's before us is, how should a Christian think about the first 2 months of Trump's presidency? It's a kind of a wide open question because the term Christian could be defined a variety of ways in our political landscape. However, I want to focus on what the Christian worldview says of the government and its authority, and whether or not it seems Trump's administration is executing the authority and governance well or poorly. I'm sure that Randall will no doubt appeal to the way things look in a lot of ways concerning public comments or policies, those sorts of things that seem objectionable in particular and bring up a lot of emotion. But whether a policy seems objectionable or not is not the issue. The issue is whether the policy is morally justifiable and something that the government ought to pursue as part of objective morality. So in line with both the biblical understanding of government and our own country's outlining of the government's responsibilities in its founding and subsequent documents, I want to just express this. Romans 14 outlines the proper role of government as just governance, punishing that which is wrong and granting freedom to that which is right. And the rule of loving one another ought to be considered above all else as we look at policy. So our response to this sort of government ought to be submission. So what has Trump sought to do in the first 2 months of office? And as far as I can tell, he has sought to punish evil, grant freedom for the good. He has eliminated DEI-based policies and governmental programs that favor immutable attributes over merit, that smuggle an intersectional philosophy based on critical theory, otherwise known as cultural Marxism or Frankfurt School, if you want to go back even further. In his dismantling of DEI, he has eliminated diversity for diversity's sake. That's never a good idea. Diversity is not bad, but diversity for diversity's sake can lead to a whole host of issues. He has reframed the orientation of government's agencies towards equality of opportunity rather than outcome, which is what the E stands for in DEI. Equity is equality of outcome, which is based in Marxist thought and classless systems. And he has eradicated a toxic inclusivity that saw a man named Rachel Levine pretending to be a woman as the Secretary of Health in the DHHS in Biden's administration. Those sorts of things are gone. I think that is objectively good. He has also sought to enforce our nation's laws concerning immigration and the legal entry into the country. He has brought illegal border crossings to record lows and has deported a myriad of illegal immigrants that had no right to be here. He's also bolstered national security by forcing both Canada and Mexico to play an integral role in maintaining their own border security. Mexico had long since ceded control of the Mexican-American border to the cartels, and Trump's tariff plan forced Mexico's hand into wresting control back from the cartels. Canada had promised to implement more strict border policies in 2021, but had failed to do so. They started to implement those policies as well. I'm sure we'll talk plenty about Canada in this conversation. Finally, Trump's foreign policy has resulted in the first talks of peace in the Russo-Ukrainian war since 2022. Of course, we don't know how that's going to end, but it is at least an on-ramp. It has also resulted in the release of a myriad of hostages from Gaza, including American citizens. It's forced Europe to rely more on themselves than on the USA financially. And not only that, but Trump's pardoning of pro-life protesters and his signaling of support to the pro-life cause by having J.D. Vance at the March for Life is more positive than even I anticipated on that front. However, there are things that Trump has done that I do not like. Absolutely there are. First, the establishment of a faith office in the federal government might seem like a good thing to some, but I don't think it's trustworthy or good, especially since Paula White is kind of the person in charge of that and leading the cause. I don't like that. I think it's more virtue signaling than it is of anything formative, and I don't like it at all. Also, Trump's trolling and rhetoric has always been a point of frustration for me. And even while it's funny at times, I find some of it off-putting and counterproductive. The release of the Epstein files, though, was, in my opinion, the most embarrassing moment of the Trump administration yet. They promised to have these files released, and then when they did it, they fell flat on their faces. They released these stupid binders. They contain nothing of substance, and they promise, oh, later they'll be released. Still nothing yet. So finally, I'm sure that Trump's issue with Canada is beyond the border issue. Beyond the border issues, I'm not sure what his issue with Canada is, but it seems to be some sort of personal vendetta against Canada itself, which I find a bit odd, especially since the USA had a trade surplus with Canada. I'm not sure what he's doing there. I don't like tariffs in general. I know other conservatives have different takes on that issue, but I don't love tariffs, and I think as a matter of policy, they are generally stupid. But I also don't know what the end goal is with what Trump is doing yet, so it's hard for me to have any substantive, like, definitive stance there. And with a lot of this stuff, it's only 2 months in. So even with the myriad of problems that this administration has given, we cannot judge it in a vacuum. The alternative was a Harris-Walz administration, which would have devastated the American people. Their policies of open borders, horrendous forward policy would have been carried on from the Biden administration, which had left much of the world on fire, and Trump is tasked with trying to clean up that mess. Abortion on demand and up to giving birth and federalizing that right, culturally Marxist ideology based on critical theory, which views society as organized only within the strata of intersections between oppressor matrices. And I'm sure that Randall will indicate Trump is ignoring court orders, and we can talk about that. I don't think he is. I think that this operates under the assumption that the courts are acting within their jurisdiction. Most are not. So given all of that, I would probably give Trump a B, maybe a B minus in his administration the first 2 months. And frankly, I'm not sure what's been so awful about it. I'm sure Randall will enlighten me. So that's kind of what I have. I don't know how long that was, but.
Well, you came in at about 6.5 minutes, so I think that's appropriate, and you'll cede the rest of your time. So, yeah. Randall, if you'd like to start now, I'll start the timer when you start speaking.
All right. Thank you very much, Brax. Thanks, Josh. I really appreciate that. So I'm going to approach it like this. I'm going to say, what kind of values should one expect in a leader from a Christian lens? And among the things you should look for is that they seek justice, that they protect the innocent and vulnerable, that they fight corruption, that they oppose evil. So I'm going to give select examples where I think the Trump administration, Donald Trump in particular, has been disappointing in that regard. So first, with respect to seeking justice, the Trump administration began on January 20th with Donald Trump issuing pardons for all of those who participated, more than 1,200 people, in the January 6th riots. Now, just the week before, or a few days before, J.D. Vance had said, quote, "If you committed violence on January 6th, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned." And yet Trump not only compared the people who were in prison for various crimes and being tried for them or allegations of crimes, he compared them to the hostages in Gaza, the Jewish hostages in Gaza. But then he also pardoned them, and that included 172 people who had pled guilty to assaulting law enforcement and 69 who pled guilty to assaulting law enforcement with a dangerous or deadly weapon. And he also commuted the sentences of Proud Boys and Oath Keepers who had been convicted of seditious conspiracy against the government. Second example that raises significant concern for me is the pardoning of Ross Ulbricht. So Ross Ulbricht had run the Silk Road, which was the first dark web marketplace where banned drugs were sold by way of Bitcoin cryptocurrency. Ulbricht facilitated the sale of more than $200 million worth of illegal drugs and other illicit goods, making his impact on the global drug trade equivalent to that of Pablo Escobar. And he was convicted, sentenced to life in prison in 2015, but on January 22nd, Trump pardoned him, and Trump has referred to himself as the crypto president. I'd like to also say a quick word about Andrew Tate, a pornographer, accused sexual abuser, human trafficker, and big Trump supporter. Andrew Tate was released from Romanian prison and flown to the United States on February 28th after the Financial Times reported that Donald Trump's special envoy, Richard Grenell, had pressured Romania to remove travel restrictions against Andrew Tate. So those are some of my significant concerns with respect to seeking justice. The second one, in terms of protecting the innocent and vulnerable, so Josh highlighted some issues with respect to pro-life concerns. I would point out, from a pro-life lens, that Robert F. Kennedy is now the HHS secretary, and his nomination was opposed, among others, by Mike Pence, because when he was running for president a year ago, he was openly in support of the restoration of Roe v. Wade. I would also just note as a sidebar, pardon the pun here in a moment, but RFK is a lawyer who's the head of the HHS, which is like having a doctor be the head of the American Bar Association. And he's a well-known anti-vaxxer, and I think in terms of protecting the health of communities, that is a significant concern, especially with the continued spread of measles right now. Another example would be Elon Musk unilaterally shutting down USAID. Musk, after making a $250 billion donation to the Trump campaign, has now been tasked as an unelected bureaucrat by another billionaire, which looks to me very much like plutocracy. USAID was founded in 1961 to bring together foreign aid assistance programs under one agency. They distribute $40 billion annually in programs including global health, education, and food. Certainly it's not perfect, but unilaterally attempting to shut it down has greatly impacted many people. According to USA Today, in February, more than $450 million of food from U.S. farmers was left to rot while people were starving, waiting for that food because of the actions of Doge. Musk also later conceded, among others, that they incorrectly shut down the funding research for Ebola, which he conceded was a mistake. I think there have been many other mistakes, and probably some of those are due to the fact that among Doge's employees are a 19-year-old high school graduate who calls himself Big Balls. On March 18th, a judge declared Musk's actions in shutting down USAID unconstitutional and ordered him to reinstate 24,000 employees. On the third one, in terms of corruption, I would argue that instead of emptying the swamp or draining it, Trump is effectively filling it. For example, there's his own selling of products, like launching his own meme coin, Trump coin, on January 17th. And according to the Financial Times, by March of 2025, so just in this month, Trump's coin had raised over $350 million. So he's monetizing the presidency, which of course is not that different from last year when he was selling Trump Bibles for $60 each, which cost him $3 each to print, and he netted $7 million. This kind of conduct, I submit, would make the money changers in the temple blush. Trump also fired the 18 inspectors general, whose role is to be an independent voice of auditing, identifying corruption and inefficiency in the government. And after he fired 18 of them in January 25th, that had a chilling effect upon the IGs. Another IG named Paul Martin was fired in February, a day after he issued a report that was critical of the Trump administration's actions on foreign aid. So the message, I think, effectively to the independent IGs is, if you speak out, you're at risk of losing your job. I'm also very disturbed by what appears to be Trump's deal with the New York mayor, Eric Adams, who was facing trial for wire fraud and accepting a bribe, among other actions. He was given the charges against him were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could be reinstated in the future. This appears to be a quid pro quo, in which, in response, Adams will now enforce the actions, the desires of the Trump administration, such as removing the status of New York as a sanctuary city. And as evidence of this, Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, said that if Adams doesn't come through, quote, "I'll be back in New York City, I'll be in his office up his butt, saying, 'Where the hell is the agreement we came to?'" So it looks like they are using the Department of Justice and misusing its authority here to withdraw charges with prejudice in order to effectively force actions from people. The last example I'll give here is selling Teslas. On March 11th, according to Axios, Musk said he would donate another $100 million to Trump's political operation. A day later, Trump hosted Elon Musk on the White House lawn to sell Teslas. ABC News reports, quote, "This set off alarms around Washington over what some see as an infomercial for the billionaire's car company on high-profile government property." Trump even went on to say that it is illegal to boycott Tesla, which of course is absurd. It's not illegal to boycott Tesla. Republicans, of course, know about boycotts with Bud Light, Target, etc. You can also boycott Tesla. I don't have time to talk about opposing evil, but we can come to that later. So that's my opening statement.
Oh my gosh, Randall, you came in at 7 minutes and 56 seconds. So that's making the most of your time. But I knew we wouldn't really need timers with guys like you. So, all right, thank you guys for your opening statements. And now we'll just go right into an hour and a half of direct back and forth. So you guys can start wherever you like with that.
All right. Randall, you said, actually, there's a lot of stuff that you said that I agree is an issue for me with Trump, which is why I wouldn't give him an A. The pardoning of January 6th protesters, I actually agree with a lot of, a few of them being pardoned, but it was kind of a blanket pardon. I didn't understand why Trump would do that. Also, Ross Ulbricht, 100% agree. There are presidents that pardon people or that do stuff like this all the time. Not that it's good if Trump does it and good if someone else does it. It just seems to be the way of things. It's unfortunate. Biden does the same thing.
So I really appreciate that. Maybe then if we could just talk for a moment, the effect of pardoning the January 6 rioters, I would call them insurrectionists. The effect is, Trump talks about valuing police and protecting police. Well, we have police that committed suicide following this and that had extreme injuries as a result of the impact of the attacks of January 6 rioters. They were calling for Mike Pence to be hanged, which is just an extraordinary thing. And I would wonder, what do you think is the impact on a healthy democracy when the people who were willing to expend violence in favor of getting Donald Trump back in the White House are pardoned? Like, what kind of message does that send for a healthy democracy?
Well, I honestly don't. I don't think there's very many people that think much beyond it now. I honestly don't. It's most of the people that I know of don't even bring up January 6th anymore, except for when it's on the news and things like that. So I don't think it sends a huge message. Any more message? I would say it sends a bigger message when some sort of when an administration tuts other riots that are going on throughout the country, when the George Floyd protests happened, when a bunch of people took over the Oklahoma State Capitol, and they said, well, and that was a violent protest as well. So I would say that that has a more of a chilling effect than pardoning or commuting the sentences of people who participated in January 6th. Most of the people who participated in January 6th were not actually violent. There were a few violent offenders that I would have liked to see stay behind bars, but
well, I listed almost 300. That's not a few. And I also noted that the head of the Proud Boys and the head of the Oath Keepers were both convicted in trial of seditious conspiracy, which is like the most serious charge. They were facing 20 years plus in prison. They've both been released. And I'm saying, what does this say? What does this communicate now to these organizations like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, that they're said, when you attempt to overthrow the government in support of Donald Trump will have your back?
Yeah, I guess I don't see it saying that. I don't actually see it saying that. I do believe that there are people that have come up, even people in Trump's own administration. I think J.D. Vance is part and parcel of that would say, hey, you know what? I can't remember who it was. One of his cabinet picks, I can't remember, said he would not have pardoned them, but Trump still picked them. So he's clearly still able to pick people that disagree with his handling of that situation. And so I think that kind of mitigates that message. But I want to move on. The Andrew Tate thing, totally agree. He's a scumbag. Now, it is worth noting that Trump, when it was brought up to Trump, whether or not he was telling the truth, I don't know. But he said, I have no idea about that. I don't know why he's here. I don't want him to be here. So he said that. And then DeSantis launched an investigation into Tate. And now Tate's been doing the circuit and podcasts, and he's despicable and disgusting. I have nothing good to say about him.
But if you're suggesting, are you suggesting that Richard Grinnell acted unilaterally and independently of the authority or knowledge of Donald Trump to pressure the Romanian government to allow Andrew Tate to travel to the United States? Because it seems to me that's very implausible. And Donald Trump has a history of denying people that he clearly does know. For example, in 2016, when David Duke endorsed him, he claimed he had never heard of this person who was the Grand Wizard of the KKK, I believe. And yet he clearly did know who David Duke was. That was documented. He claimed when he was in the sexual abuse trial with E. Jean Carroll that he didn't even know who this woman was. Well, her lawyers provided pictures of him with her, so he clearly did know who she was. So I don't know why one would believe him that he didn't know who Tate was, or to claim that Richard Grinnell acted independent of Trump on his own authority. It doesn't seem credible to me.
Well, the whole report doesn't necessarily seem credible to me about, hey, Richard Grinnell pressured him. I don't know what Richard Grinnell did or didn't do. All I know is what Trump said in response to the question. So maybe Richard Grinnell was saying, hey, you've got an American citizen, you need to give him more freedom of movement, and that was it. Maybe Richard Grinnell said, hey, you need to let him come to the United States. I don't know, and generally speaking, I'm not trustworthy of most news sources these days reporting facts accurately anyway. So to me, I don't think that holds much. Yeah, sure. Andrew Tate coming to the United States is annoying, and I can't stand the man. I don't think that Trump cares. I don't know if I said that Trump didn't know him. Maybe I did say that. Maybe I misspoke. I think I said that Trump didn't know about him coming to the United States. And
sure, that's what I'm saying. Is I'm pressing you on that. I think it's very implausible to think that Richard Grinnell, independently of any support from Trump, comes as a representative of the U.S. government to Romania, pressuring them to release him and allow him to travel to the United States. I think he would only do that with Trump's awareness, and it just strains credulity to think that this somehow happened because he acted independently of Donald Trump's authority or awareness.
Yeah, I think that I don't know if I agree with that. I think Donald Trump has a history of saying, "Hey, I have chosen you to do a job. Go do the job. You need to intervene on behalf of American citizens." I don't think Richard Grinnell is coming to him and saying, "Oh, by the way, when I go to Romania, hey, do you want me to tell them that Andrew Tate's going to come?" And they have a conversation about that. I think Trump's plate is much more full than that. So I actually tend to think it is not beyond.
Okay, well, so Andrew Tate has now been in Florida for more than 3 weeks. If Richard Grinnell acted independently of Trump's authority and against Trump's wishes, don't you think Trump would have fired him or come out with some sort of public statement reprimanding him for having brought this pornographer and abuser and human trafficker into the United States?
No, because I don't think Trump cares.
He doesn't care about those issues, about bringing...
No,
well, he certainly cares if it's certain people, that he doesn't want certain people coming in who are criminals.
Well, but technically, Andrew Tate is an American citizen.
Well, sure, I know, but I'm saying, but in terms of he does care if people come into the United States who are criminals and pornographers and human traffickers. Well,
yeah, I'm sure Trump cares about he wishes there weren't any criminals in the United States, but the United States citizens have a right to be in the United States, and so he's not going to say that every high-profile criminal should be expelled from the United States if they're a citizen. That's not going to happen. I don't think he cares about that. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, so I'll just say again, I think if Trump had a problem with what Richard Grinnell did, we would have heard of that by now.
Maybe. I just don't think so.
Okay, fair enough.
He doesn't air out all of his grievances with every single person in his staff. He airs out a lot of grievances. Right. Let me point that out. He does. But generally speaking, with specific individuals in his staff, he doesn't do it until it gets to the point of no return for him, and then he goes hellfire and brimstone. So I've asked you a few questions. I'd like to discuss the USAID because I think that's probably a more important discussion than anecdotal things, because these seem pretty small examples of
these everything I've just talked about is a small example in what respect?
Well, yeah, just individual people. I'm talking policies. There are plenty of things that presidents do with individual people that I don't understand and don't like. That's happened across the board throughout the history of the United States when I followed presidents. With their individual relationships with people, or plenty of things that they do that I don't like. so I think it's more substantive to talk about policy and direction of country than it is whether or not he likes Andrew Tate.
Okay. Sorry, I got to pick my dog up. I have a very neurotic dog, and he's been trying to get picked up for the last 5 minutes. Okay, well, we can talk about USAID for sure.
Okay. Yeah. So in the USAID, Trump has said that he likes the concept of the USAID, but it seems to have been taken over by the radical left as a tool for indoctrination internationally rather than development. Did you hear him say that?
Hey guys, before you answer that, Randall, and before you go on, two things.
Yeah.
One, could we see your dog on camera? Is that okay?
Oh, he showed it.
Yeah, there he is.
You need to put him full screen.
Move him over in front. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Beautiful dog. Beautiful dog. We love dogs around here. Not so big on cats. I don't know what that says about us. But also, I just want to say real quick, I know we're just getting started, but I'd also like to just add a reminder that at some point, if we can, make this specific to how Christians should view these things. I just want to say to the audience that what we are presuming in this discussion is that these two men are coming at this from a perspective of Christian ethics. They may disagree a little bit about what Christian ethics says, and that will be part of the discussion. But if you're wondering, like, well, what does this say about Christianity? Well, that we're presuming that this is a discussion from the vantage point of Christian ethics. So, thanks, guys.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason I want to get into like some policy things too, because sure, there's a lot of things that, and I have been outspoken about that. I think Trump is not a Christian. There are people who do think he is. I don't think he's a Christian. I've been outspoken with the fact that I think he's done very immoral things, and he's not a moral person. So I'd like, getting into policy and how we should think about that. Do you agree that it would be good, ethically speaking, to root out waste and corruption in things like USAID?
It would, I think, would be implied by my opening statement with where I took issue with the firing of the IGs. Yeah, I definitely think we should have independent oversight to root out corruption and inefficiency.
Okay. Yeah. So the USAID, and I think there's a lot that in 2019, the USAID had 1,700 contracts. By 2024, that number is now 6,200 contracts. So it has ballooned. It was $27 billion in 2019. It's now $50 billion in 2024. Are we saying that the USAID spending in those 6 years is good? That having that amount, that having that balloon and saying, whoa, there's not a lot going on here. There's a lot going on here. We need to actually check and make sure that this is going where they say it's going to go.
So I would say that you just the fact that spending has increased in a 6-year period doesn't tell you anything in and of itself about your value for dollar. So yeah, you should have careful analysis, but I don't think that begins with a 19-year-old named Big Balls who's working for Doge, and I don't think it begins with Elon Musk at CPAC holding up a chainsaw to give a visual metaphor of how he's going to destroy the lives of people by summarily firing 24,000 people without clearly looking at what each one of them is doing. So I think that the way he has approached the very values that you are espousing here, which I affirm, has been ham-fisted at best and perhaps, deeply harmful.
Well, to be clear, he's not holding up the chainsaw to say, hey, just wait until I cut all these. He's not specifically being personal with it. He's saying there is so much waste and corruption in the USAID. The chainsaw is hacking away government overreach, overspending, and government waste. And the government is funded by taxpayer dollars. And if our dollars are going to fund things overseas that are not moral or in America's interest, one or the other or both, then it is good to hack those things off with a chainsaw. And in a recent study showed that in 2023, 9 out of every $10 that the USAID spent in 2022 actually just sat with contractors in Washington, D.C. They didn't actually even go to help the places where they were said to go. So 90% of the spending has been given to contractors in the United States in Washington, D.C., going to do all sorts of various work that may or may not be beneficial. In fact, in 2019, it was found that only 43% of USAID expenditures, and this is before it ballooned, actually accomplished what they said they were going to accomplish.
So can I just follow up on the one fact? So you said about 90% in the 2023 statistics said about 90% of funding was in the U.S., and we don't know if it was effectual or not to that effect. And I would just say, so again, I would say first of all, that's a meaningless statistic unless you can tell me what percentage was versus was not ineffectual, because it may be extraordinarily effectual. One thing I think that reflects is that U.S. farmers, that USAID is buying all this food from U.S. farmers like corn and wheat and then sending it overseas. And that is, in principle, certainly a very admirable exercise of soft power, which benefits the farmers and which for the last 60 years has ingratiated many people around the world in what the U.S. has to offer. Just like the Voice of America radio service around the world, which the Trump administration apparently just shut down this week.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. The second statistic was only 43% of those contracts actually filled what they were supposed to do, but yet received all of their funding. That was the second part of the statistic.
So then the question is this. So again, first of all, I'm not conceding, I'm not disputing that USAID has been inefficient in times. Perhaps there's been corruption. I mean, in any government organization or any human institution, there will be. The question is whether Elon Musk and his approach with Doge has been effectual at achieving the outcomes that they profess to want. And I don't think it is. And I gave a very specific and I think huge example, two of them actually. The first one pertaining to all of this $450 million worth of food that was stuck in ports because they had shut down USAID and it was rotting instead of going to people. And second, shutting down Ebola research, which when you interrupt research, often this is research that you've now destroyed the whole study because you've put a pause on it in 2 weeks, and that's time-sensitive information.
Yeah, so there's two things with that. One, I'm not aware of the food thing that you brought up. I'll just take your word on it, but that's true. And I'm fully willing to say that when you're cutting programs and you're trying to deal with $50 billion worth of cuts and the 43% is effectual or not, there are probably going to be some downstream effects that we don't like. I get that. But ultimately what Trump and the administration is supposed to do is try to figure out a way to make it more effective, and not just maintain the ineffectiveness that it is. The second part to that is whether or not people believe this or not, it's officially the position that technically Doge doesn't have power. They have responsibility to give suggestions, but they don't have power. It's Marco Rubio that is the one that is effectuating and actualizing that change. So it's not the 19-year-old. It's not Elon Musk. He can say, hey, this looks like waste to me. And then Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is the one that is proposing the cuts to the USAID. So I think that, I don't think that Elon is an unelected bureaucrat in that sense, because he doesn't actually have the power. Even Trump said, no, Marco Rubio has the power, not Elon Musk. He has the power to give suggestions. He does not have power to effectuate change or to fire people. But we can grant him the power to be able to collect the data and to be able to present what may or may not be fruitful.
So this would simply raise the question of why is Marco Rubio persona non grata in ceding practically all of this power to Doge, to act unilaterally, to enter government agencies, to demand to have access to information, and then to unilaterally fire people. I mean, why is Elon Musk on a weekend emailing everybody in the government and saying, like, report by Monday at noon to your supervisor, like 5 things you did last week or you're fired? I mean, as somebody who does workplace investigations, this is unfathomable that people would act in this such a lawless way, lacking any, I mean, how can Elon Musk be the person to decide? And you think about like somebody, let's say, who's working in with confidential information, they're supposed to send an email to their supervisor of the 5 things they did. I mean, it's just so ridiculous.
Well,
there's no thought going into this.
But that's not even what's actually happening. They've said if you're dealing with things of national security, you don't need to email in. That's what they said. They've said
He sent out an email and he posted on Twitter, assuming that people on the weekend are checking their email, their work mail, or checking Twitter to see what, or X, sorry, to see what Elon Musk happens to be saying that day. Can I talk about the whole thing with Tesla, since we're talking about Musk? Sure. I mean, how do you feel about the fact that Donald Trump is promoting Teslas in front of the White House?
Well, I think he did that because people were blowing up, lighting Teslas on fire, keying them, wiping poop on them, painting swastikas on them, and doing that sort of stuff. I think it was a show of solidarity. It wasn't selling Teslas. I mean, people.
Well, of course, it's trying to sell Teslas. I mean, the whole point is to try to boost the stock and to sell more cars. So, are you comfortable with the White House being used as a backdrop to promote a specific commercial enterprise?
I think the whole point is actually to say, hey, you might burn and explode Teslas, but we're going to stand in solidarity with free market capitalism in the United States, and this sort of behavior is not going to be tolerated. And as a show of that, Donald Trump, am buying a Tesla, which is a great company that I like.
So you are comfortable with it?
Yeah, I don't care.
With selling Teslas in front of the White House. You're comfortable with the office of the presidency being used to boost particular private industry brands?
No, recognize that the message isn't just to boost Tesla. It's to boost the idea that you can't just destroy people's private property because you don't like a company. And Donald Trump is saying, okay, well, I'm going to buy a Tesla, then come blow up my Tesla. Right? That's the stand in solidarity. That's what it is. It's not to try to get Elon Musk's stock to rise.
Okay, so can I ask then? Can I ask?
Donald Trump.
Yeah. When there was a boycott against Bud Light a couple years ago, you would be comfortable with Joe Biden hosting a Bud Light extravaganza on the White House to boost Bud Light's brand against all of the boycotts and attacks on Bud Light.
And this is the conflation here. If people were going to a Bud Light factory and trying to blow it up, or seeing people's Bud Light in their houses and lighting their fridge on fire, then yeah, sure. Say, hey, this violence will not intimidate us. Whatever. That's the point of it.
Okay, I'll just say I think that's deeply mistaken, and that what Trump could have done, which I think you should rightly censure violent acts against Tesla dealerships, vandalism of Teslas, it's unconscionable. The way you would deal with that is having, let's say, the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi, give a statement, give a press conference, say this is what we as the Department of Justice are doing to target and fight against this, because this is unacceptable. What I don't think you do is turn the White House into a car lot.
Okay, so but how does that? I'm trying to understand how even that is something that's outside of like Christian morals and ethics. You might not like the optics of it politically, but
that kind of quid pro quo where you have one billionaire hosting another billionaire's car company, using the public institutions and monetizing those public institutions, just like he did with Trump coin, in order to boost his friends so he can make more money. Yeah, I think that is corrupt. I think that is a kleptocracy.
I don't think Trump or Elon Musk need help with each other to make more money. Do you actually think they do?
Well,
Trump is the only.
Well, the interesting thing is,
that has actually their net worth has gone down after being president than gone up. Obama was worth like $300,000, and then he became president. Now he's a multi-millionaire.
Well, let's say Trump just potentially made lots of money selling Trump coin. If Trump's cumulative income went down in his first term, I would say that's not because he wasn't corrupt. I would say that's because he did a lot of things to tarnish the Trump brand. But I think he definitely repeatedly monetized the presidency in the first administration as well.
You think?
What do you think about the Eric Adams relationship with Tom Holman, and appears like the Justice Department removing these charges with prejudice so they could reinstate them again? It looks to me very corrupt.
Okay, I don't know. I don't think I would agree with exactly how you're framing that. But I will say that I do think that illegal immigration is actually a blight on the American system. The Christian thing to do as a president is to actually hone that in by as many legal means necessary. And it doesn't seem that this is actually an illegal means to do that. So I think it is actually within a Christian worldview, the purview to reduce illegal immigration by reducing sanctuary cities, by people who have entered the country illegally are by definition here illegally, and it is moral and good to deport them if they're here illegally. It is okay to do that. So I don't see.
But are you saying that if Eric Adams has been charged with wire fraud and a bribe, that it would be appropriate to dismiss the charges with prejudice, which means they could be reinstated at any time, as a means to pressure him to accomplish the good that you're describing? Because that sounds to me like that's a utilitarian ethical model. Is that your view?
I'm saying I don't know that that's what they're doing. You're telling me that's what they're doing. I don't know.
Well, what do you think Tom Holman went when he said that if he doesn't come through in supporting our policies, quote, I'll be back in New York City, I'll be in his office up his butt saying, where the hell is the agreement we came to? I mean, what do you think he's referring to there? Well, and he did that interview with Eric Adams sitting beside him.
Yeah, I think Tom Holman doesn't have any ability to bring or press any charges. I think he's talking about the agreement to make New York City not a sanctuary state and to actually get violent illegal immigrants out of our country.
Randall, before you come back on that point, let me just say some people in the chat are saying that Josh's volume just decreased quite a bit. I don't know if that was maybe something that you did with your hand. The streaming software equalizes volume, so
I don't know
how much I can do on my end, but maybe turn it up a little bit if there's a way to do that. But it seems like it's still listenable, so you guys just continue.
Okay.
So you mentioned some things about the war in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Of course, Trump promised that war would be done in 24 hours of when he became president, if not before he actually assumed office, and that certainly hasn't turned out to be the case. But I would be interested in getting your feedback on the way that Donald Trump has talked both about Zelensky and about Putin, who I believe to be a murderous dictator. So Trump, on February 18th, claimed that Ukraine started the war, which is, like, to my mind, Russia Today propaganda. In fact, of course, Putin started the war in February of 22, and when he did, Trump called Putin, quote, a genius and, quote, savvy. He claimed that Zelensky is a dictator, which is false. He claimed that Zelensky has a 4% approval rating. At the time, it was actually 57%. He has repeatedly falsely claimed that the United States gave $350 million to Ukraine when the most that was earmarked for them was $175 million. So are you comfortable with the way that Trump has talked about Putin versus Zelensky and the way that he repeatedly appears to be siding with Putin rather than Ukraine?
So, so the thing about international foreign policy is what you see in public is rarely what's going on behind the scenes. Like when Trump said that about Putin being smart, it was because Putin sees the opportunity that Joe Biden left wide open because we're pulled out of Afghanistan, and Putin said, "Oh, America's not going to do anything about us if we invade Ukraine, so we're gonna go for it." That's what Trump was talking about. Trump uses these superlatives with foreign leaders, even ones that he doesn't like, if they do things he thinks are obviously smart. It's not bad to recognize.
Exactly. I appreciate the concession that he thinks invading another nation is smart.
Okay, but it's
and
not.
He does like Putin. You can't deny that he likes Putin. He's got affection for Putin.
it doesn't. Saying someone's smart is not a moral exemplification. We're not saying. Oh, if I say Anton LaVey was really smart, it's not to say Satanism is good or Anton LaVey is even a good person. It's to say that he.
But if you do something evil, by definition, it's not smart, is it?
Well, I don't think. I think it's immoral, but there are a lot of smart people who do immoral things.
But you're equivocating. We're not talking about whether the person is smart. We're talking about whether the action is smart. So the issue is whether the action of invading Ukraine at this time was smart. And I think it was stupid in retrospect and at the time because it's destroyed their economy. But I also think it was criminal and it was evil. And I would never call it smart.
I know you would never call it smart. I'm saying from Trump's perspective, when he looks at what sorry, is that better? Because I couldn't hear myself for a second either. When he looks at what Putin did, he's not saying invading Ukraine is smart. He's saying, hey, Trump or Putin clearly saw an opening, and strategically speaking, if you want to invade Ukraine, it is smart to attack at that moment. Now, I agree with you that it doesn't seem to be smart because Putin definitely underappreciated the Ukrainian people's resilience and their ability to resist, and land wars are very difficult to win. But I don't think it's a moral superlative that Trump is giving out. I don't think it is. Now, whether or not Trump has affection for Putin, I don't know, but I do know this. He knows how to get deals done, and this is the way that he sees it. He says, I have to be hard on Ukraine to get them to the table, and I'll get to that in a second. And I have to appear soft on Russia. That does not mean he is, and maybe he is. We'll see how this all shakes out at the end, and maybe I would say, yeah, that was an immoral way of ending this war. But leading up to this, Biden was backing Zelensky's play of returning to 2014 Ukrainian boundaries. And that was never going to happen unless the UN and the United States got involved militarily, not just financially or fiscally. Unless they got involved unilaterally and declared war on Russia, that was never going to happen. And so Trump comes in and says, look, this isn't going to happen. We don't want to get involved militarily. Zelensky, you have to be okay with ceding some territory. Zelensky says, I can't do that. I already told my people if I go back on that, I already told my people that I wasn't going to do that. And Trump said, and Trump says, don't worry, I'm the bad guy here. I'm the bad guy. We'll get and so that's why you see the thing that happened in the Oval Office. I think it was actually a strategic play by both sides to see the fact that so that Putin would see that it looks like Zelensky is strong-armed to get to the table. But Zelensky knows there needs to be an off-ramp as much as anyone else. Now, the thing is Trump can't end the conflict without Europe's help in stopping to buy Russian oil. If Europe is able to just stop buying Russian oil, Europe has bought more in Russian oil than they've given to Ukraine in aid over the last 2 years. They've given Russia more money than they've given Ukraine, the Europeans.
Do you think that like Trump's repeatedly lying or saying false things, like praising Putin, calling Zelensky a dictator, suggesting, claiming that his approval rating is 4%, do you think that's all part of a grand strategy then?
Yeah, because that's how Trump makes deals. That's how Trump makes deals. So the question then is it moral to have this sort of strategy to end a war, or should he just say all the things we want him to say, and then Putin would never even come to the table at all? Clearly, now,
at that White House meeting, so Trump said, criticizing Zelensky to his face, he's saying, this guy has all this hatred for Putin. I don't know what to do with this hatred. I'm paraphrasing, but something to that effect, which I found to be extraordinary, because Putin is a first-order war criminal who invaded Zelensky's country. And one of the things that doesn't get enough attention is Russia has kidnapped between 20 and 30,000 Ukrainian children and sent them into the interior of Russia to be adopted by Russian families. Good God, why wouldn't he hate Putin? And to use that as a rhetorical critique of Zelensky, to my mind, is unfathomable.
Well, see, and this is, I agree that what Putin bad. On this we agree, okay? Putin bad. On this we agree. I think Trump did say, and I understand that in the conversation, he did say it. If you read through the transcript, he says he hates Putin so much, and I understand that. What he was pointing to was this is why it's so hard to get this deal done, because of this animosity and hatred. He wasn't saying that Zelensky should like Putin. He was saying, unfortunately, to come to the table in an international conflict like that, you have to put your hate aside at some point. And that's the unfortunate reality, unless you're willing to completely sacrifice the rest of your country and continue in the war effort indeterminately.
You know what's interesting to me is in World War II, the United States didn't say, you know what, we got to come to some kind of deal with Hitler here. So let's figure out which land he gets and which land we keep. And during the Soviet Union, during the Cold War, presidents like Reagan didn't say, well, you know what, we got to concede, we're going to have to give something up to you. He said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And yet now I keep thinking, what we have here is one nation invading another nation, violating every international law by doing so. This is like one kid on the playground grabbing another kid and starting to punch him, and you're saying to the other kid, what are you going to give up to get him to stop punching you? This is such a different mentality I hear when it comes to Russia than the witness of the United States since World War II, and I wonder why that is.
Well, I think part of that is because this is not, regardless of how we want to see it, this is not primarily United States in a conflict. They're brokering the ending between a conflict of two nations. Whatever our interest is in Ukraine, and we do have interest in Ukraine, whether or not the war did not have to do with the United States versus Russia. It didn't have to do with that. In World War II, it did, especially, the United States wasn't interventionist until Pearl Harbor. Now, you can argue that they should have been, but that just hasn't been, that wasn't the deal. So I think that's the difference, is now you're coming in and saying, hey, need to end this war. Now, if Ukraine wants to say, we're not going to end it, we're going to fight until the fighting's good, the fighting ends, the question is, does the United States, do they maintain a moral duty to then intervene with somebody who isn't in NATO, who is intervene and be militarily involved in a conflict with Russia? Are we willing to do that? I don't think we are, and I don't think we should be. That's the difference.
Well, I think you could argue, even setting aside moral questions, just pure Machiavellian self-interest. It is within the United States' interest and Europe's interest to have Ukraine as a buffer against an expansionist Russia and a murderous dictator like Putin. And so for that reason alone, it makes all the sense in the world to continue to protect this country. Listen, so you mentioned Canada. We have a word about Canada.
Let's get to Canada.
This is going to get hits a little close to home for me since I am in Canada. So Laura Ingraham interviewed Trump a few days ago. And I mean, this is Laura Ingraham. Like, this is not Rachel Maddow. And this is what she said. You're tougher with Canada than you are with our biggest adversaries. Why? Trump, two things he says, quote, only because it's meant to be our 51st state. And he also said, one of the nastiest countries to deal with is Canada. Well, we weren't nasty until you repeatedly threatened to annex us. So first of all, there's that. But people initially talked about this repeated obsession with annexing Canada as maybe as trolling or joking, and that he's not. You don't continue to say something like that, which is so incredibly destructive, not only of international relations, but of businesses on the border. I just saw a story about tourism from Canada to Tennessee has crashed, about the cancellation of cross-border contracts, about just antipathy and hostility between peoples that never existed before, all being fomented by this fellow who repeatedly talks about Canada being nasty and being the 51st state, which is deeply threatening and offensive language. And I wonder how you feel about that.
Hey, so I'll address this in two different ways, and I think we can move on to a different topic. One, when I went and spoke in Canada last January, what a dumb time for me to go speak in Canada, but I did. Dumb weather-wise, not any other reason. But I went up there, and a lot of very conservative Christians in the area I went into in Manitoba, and a bunch of them were like, "Oh, we wish we could be a part of Canada." So there's at least some of them.
You mean be a part of the U.S.?
Oh, yeah, that's what I meant to say. Be a part of the U.S. So, and there was some really angry attitudes towards the Canadian government. I wasn't actually prepared for that, especially among the dairy farmers I talked to when I went up there. So I realize that's anecdotal, and I don't think Canada wants to be annexed as the 51st state. I don't think we're going to. I don't think we plan to. I don't understand what Trump is doing, and this is one where I go, you know. So if you want cards on the table, what I think Trump is trying to do, and trying to read Trump sometimes is impossible. What I think he's trying to do is, I think he really dislikes Trudeau. I think he really likes the Liberal Party in Canada. And so that's why he's hammering them. I don't think that's good. Let me be clear. I don't think that's good. And I also think it's going to accomplish the opposite of what he intends, because I think Pierre Poilievre is dropping in the polls, whereas if he would have just left things the way they are, I would guess he would probably be close to solidifying the leadership as Prime Minister in Canada. So I, in one sense, I know that there is some conservative frustration in Canada of people who would like to rather be in the United States. On the other end, I don't know what Trump is trying to accomplish with his conversations with Canada. So, I don't like it. So that's where I stand. I don't know if that's anyway. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Trudeau, of course, is no longer prime minister, so
yeah, it's
I haven't
Carney,
seen.
Right?
Mark Carney. So I haven't seen any change in Trump's rhetoric. But you are right that there's a good chance the Conservative Party of Canada would have been elected in the upcoming election had Trump not repeatedly attacked Canada and attacked their leader, which has just caused Canadians to become more nationalistic and prideful and to retrench on the Liberal Party. So it's ironic that when we talk about Trump being a master deal maker, in fact, once again, he shoots himself in the foot by unnecessarily alienating and offending people. Are you comfortable with the U.S., with Trump repeatedly talking about taking the Panama Canal back and taking Greenland, which both imply military action?
I actually don't think they imply military action. Basically, the Panama Canal thing is done. The Panama Authority has said they have divested interest in the Chinese. The Chinese are no longer going to do business there. I think past 2026, they're going to get it done earlier. And so I think it is in America's interest and in the moral interest of the trade and of the world for Panama not to have quote unquote private, because they're not really private, companies that are running the ports on each entry in Panama. So I actually think that's pretty much done. I don't think Trump means we're going to send. We might send military down there to aid Panama, because we said we gave it to you to manage. Don't give it to the Chinese. But I don't think we're going to take it over by force. With Greenland, he's talked about voting in Greenland as a part of it. So he's not talking about or purchasing it from Denmark. He said we're with you if you want to be purchased. So we have military bases in Greenland right now. And actually, some of the history of Greenland is fascinating. In January, there was actually a recent poll that said 57% of Greenlanders actually liked the idea of becoming an American territory. I know there was a protest of a couple thousand recently against that, but 57% in that. Another.
Well, they just had an election, and they voted the person who's very strongly against anything to do with the United States.
Yeah, so another show that 43% liked it, 13% were undecided. So I think this was Trump's way of saying, hey, Greenland, if you want to vote for independence, you can vote for independence and you can join our side. The reason, and then perhaps try to purchase it from Denmark. I don't think we're going to attack Greenland, and we're going to claim
Language
it as our
matters. Language matters, especially when you're the head of state. And when you say, I don't think it's going to be taken by force, I don't think he's going to invade Greenland, maybe I don't think he literally wants to annex Canada. The problem is language matters. And the damage in geopolitical relations with this kind of reckless talk is incalculable. So I find it very concerning. What do you think about his plan, which he's talked significantly about, to take over the Gaza Strip, remove all of the Palestinians living in Gaza, and turn it into a Gaza-Lago resort for the world? Are you comfortable with that?
It's funny. Tim Stratton and I have talked about this. My personal opinion is no. I don't think the United States should be involved in Gaza. I think the United States should pull out, and this is where you and I might disagree. I should pull out and say, Israel, this is your land. Do with it as you need to do with it. We're not going to annex it or take control of it. So I don't like that either. What I do like. So some of the things I do like is. I mentioned them all. I don't think we've actually talked about a lot of the things I talked about in my initial little 6.5 minute thing. But I do think that there is some semblance of sanity, especially on moral issues as far as transgenderism in sports, as far as I wish he was more hawkish on one of the things I'll say that I think Trump, so I might move it down to a B- because of this, is his support for IVF. I don't like because I'm pro-life. But I think the trans athletes of sports, I think removing the ability for, I don't think trans people should have active duty roles in the military because it is a mental illness, and I don't think we need that in our military. And I think it is immoral to continue to play into that. So I'm just going to throw those things out because we've talked a lot about the questions that you have for me. Again, Gaza, I think the U.S. should stay out of it.
Okay, can I jump in real quick, guys? I'd just like to say, as we're discussing military involvement as it relates to Ukraine-Russia conflict, and now Gaza and Israel and what all that means, I have to admit that in my personal worldview, I have a little bit of a conflict in my own thinking when it comes to military involvement at all, when it comes to violence that we see on the battlefield. And I just wondered, since this is from a Christian perspective, you don't have to give like a dissertation or anything, and I don't want to take away from the opportunity that Randall will have to answer the questions that Josh just raised. But I wondered if you guys could each kind of give maybe just a paragraph on your own view on just war theory, or when that's appropriate, and how that might relate to the current conflicts. I think that would be helpful.
As far as the United States is concerned?
Just in general, when is how do we feel about military violence, war, when to get involved, when not to get involved, those kind of things, to just kind of set up kind of the structure of the arena that we're discussing here from a Christian perspective.
Oh, okay. Randall, you look like you were ready to talk first.
Well, I can just say quickly, it's a great question, but I think some days I'm Francis of Assisi and other days I'm Reinhold Niebuhr. In other words, some days I'm like a prophetic, pacifistic witness, and other days I'm like realpolitik. Let's try to minimize the suffering in the world and approximate the kingdom as best we can with measured, judicious uses of violence for necessary ends, in sort of an Augustinian rubric of just war, perhaps. So I find myself pulled in both directions, and I honestly think a healthy prophetic Christian witness is one that does include both voices. I think often, like the danger, if the entire Christian witness was pacifistic, I think that there'd be cumulative negative impact in terms of our marginalization of our witness. But if it was all just war, I think we would lose the counterbalance of the pacifistic witness as well. So I think the totality of the Christian witness is served by having these different voices. And that's why I'm reluctant to say what the Christian view is. I think Christians are going to just speak out of their own conscience on these issues.
Yeah, I tend to kind of agree with that too. I do think that there is a point in which a nation, just as a person, is righteous in their response and violence. I would point it to, like, if somebody broke into my home and tried to kidnap my children and my wife, I think I am morally justified to use violence in order to make that stop. If gang members tried to take over my neighborhood and were endangering my neighbors, I'm morally justified in using violence as a means to expel them from the neighborhood.
Is that something you agree with, Randall? Do you agree with that much?
The use of violence to expel people from the neighborhood?
Well, the use of violence, let's just reserve it to the use of violence to protect your own family within the confines of your own property, let's say.
Sure. I mean, you're going to use the threshold of violence required to restrain the evildoer.
Yeah, and so when it comes to nations, I think obviously that gets more muddy because now we're talking about nation states and that sort of thing, and who's the aggressor, who's not. Which is why I'd rather see peace. But sometimes there is necessary measures to respond because not everybody as a nation has a moral compass in what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing. So I do think that sometimes those measures in response are a better way to guarantee peace than passivity.
Okay, I could come back to the trans issues you raised.
Okay.
So a couple different things there in terms of sports. The one thing I'll just say, first of all, is that I think that I'm going to say, in my view, there's something of a cynical, but I mean, strategically wise use of this as a wedge issue during the election. And I think it got, with respect, outsized focus for its relative importance, given the full gamut of issues one should be considering in an election. And I think that was one of the things that motivated a lot of people to vote, and that helped to get Trump elected. So there is that thing to keep in mind. And so I think its interest is relatively lowered compared to some of the other things we've certainly been talking about here. I don't have a problem with the government not supporting public funding for organizations that would have trans competitors in their sports leagues, so on. And I've often pressed people on that. I've given them an illustration, like, would you be, if LeBron James identified as female, and this is not, and I don't mean this for people who are trans to make light of their experience, but it is a hypothetical that if LeBron James identified as female, would it be permissible for LeBron James to compete in the WNBA? And I've gotten very mixed response from people who would consider themselves very progressive on that issue, which I think is interesting. So I think even people who consider themselves progressive on that issue often find their intuitions with specific cases being pulled in different directions. Now, in terms of the military, I'm like, okay, so I don't deny that I think people who are trans experience gender dysphoria, and there are various ways to address their experience of gender dysphoria, of not identifying with the birth sex. But I would wonder, what is your basis for concluding that in and of itself is sufficient to exclude them from the military, irrespective of what any other views you have? Or how does that necessarily negatively impact them? And is there statistical evidence that really undercuts their ability to participate in the military effectively?
Well, I think any mental illness that leads to 47%, or I think 43 or 47%, I might be getting my statistics jumbled in my head here, 40 of self-harm would not work well to be in the military. That's not a good so just like if somebody is on anxiety medicine, often they will get told that they can't join the military. So it's the same thing. When you have a worldview that or not a worldview, but a position personally that sees that, then I think you are putting others and yourself at risk.
Do you have actual evidence, though, that I'm curious, from people who are serving as transgender in the military? Do you have evidence that those specific individuals do perform at a lower level than cisgender people in the military?
Well, I haven't looked up specific studies, but I think generally speaking, when you're talking, especially if somebody's on cross-sex hormones and stuff like that, you're if it's a male going to female, if you're taking estrogen and doing cross-sex hormones, you are going to start to be less strong. You are going to start to exhibit some of the features that a woman would exhibit. You're not going to be able to carry your duties that you were called to carry forward. So, I would say, I think, even though I don't have the studies right in front of my face, that it seems to be obvious that would be the case.
I think that one needs to establish that one cannot reason from their armchair about issues like this to say, well, I just assume a person who is trans would be less effective in the military. I think one actually would need to have the kind of evidence in its place to support a categorical ban of people. And I mean, I would think if specific trans people were performing at a lower level in the military, then maybe they shouldn't be in the military. But that's very different from saying trans people just cause shouldn't be in the military. I mean, would you be okay if there were trans people that were established as performing at an equal, if not superior level to their peers? If they remained, would be okay with that? Or is this not really an issue about performance at all?
Well, there might be an individual that is able to perform or whatever. I don't know. I don't think you can make rules based on individuals. I think you have to make rules based on the aggregate. And the idea is that almost 50% have self-harm tendencies. It is clearly at least as mentally challenging and possibly physically challenging because of the fact that you can generate osteoporosis and stuff like that, especially if you're on these cross-sex hormones. Given all of those things in the aggregate, I think it is better than to have that policy in place. Yes.
So if hypothetical scenario here, if it were established that in aggregate a particular racial group performed at a lower level than another racial group, then you would support the categorical banning of all members of that racial group because of the statistical decrease in performance relative to the aggregate.
No, because the correlation isn't the causation in that case.
Well, I don't know. I mean, but now you're adding. I mean, here I thought you were just saying if the group statistically performs at a lower level, that would warrant excluding the entire group.
Because this isn't an immutable characteristic. This is something to have to do with actual health and mental health and physical health. It's not like I was born black.
All right. Well, I think we've probably given that sufficient attention.
Yeah,
I would be interested.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been going for about an hour 20 here. I don't know.
Yeah, Brex. Well, we can take questions or however you guys want to conclude the last 10 minutes or so.
That's fine. I think you guys have done a fantastic job going back and forth. I really enjoyed that. I think it's going to be helpful. There are some questions coming in, and if you have questions, we have some extra time here that we could answer some questions. I'll go ahead and start with one that kind of takes us back to the discussions of our previous debate. I think it's still relevant insofar as these things can have an impact going forward, even if they're not what's happened in the first 2 months. Nitty asks, which is more Christian, repealing Roe versus Wade or keeping it? Why? So we've sufficiently opened a can of worms there for you all to deal with.
Yeah. Who wants to take this one? I guess I'll go first. Since
Go ahead, Josh.
Well, I think not only is it more Christian, but it was a horribly decided legal case anyway. So jurisprudence-wise, it was appropriate to repeal it. But it is more Christian to repeal it because then you can move forward in various ways to eradicate abortion.
Randall?
One of the issues here is that, of course, abortion has become, for many evangelicals, like the defining issue, right? That defines them as evangelical, whereas a lot of the other things we've been talking about don't even measure. And I think, again, like with the transgender issue, that's disproportionate. So what Roe v. Wade, as I understand it, it's not my country, not my law, but as I understand it, it allowed for unrestricted access to abortion in the first trimester, and then for elective purposes, and then limited access in the subsequent trimesters for medical reasons, life of the mother, and so on. Is that fair? Is that correct?
It just said that you couldn't establish a law on a statewide basis to limit abortion in those cases.
So, but it was unrestricted in the first trimester, right?
Yeah,
That's
but it
yeah.
did not. It would not be. It would not be against Roe v. Wade to have a law that was unrestricted in the third trimester.
The one thing that I'd like to point out when it comes to abortion is that we all have intuitions, most of us at least have intuitions about ontological development in utero, that the longer a child lives in utero, the greater the moral gravity of abortion or of ending the life of that child. As a case in point or illustration, so if you have a fire in a building, in a fertility clinic, in one room you've got 100 fertilized embryos, in the other room you've got one infant, you only have time to save the 100 fertilized embryos or the one infant. Where do you direct your attention and energy? And I think most people would save the infant rather than saving the 100 fertilized embryos, even though the 100 fertilized embryos are living human beings. And the reason why you would save the one over the 100, I believe, is a recognition of the moral gravity of abortion increasing because the significance of what it means to kill this individual over time increases. And so it's not unreasonable for there to be legislation that reflects that, and in particular reflects the life and health of the mother, the role for therapeutic abortions, which I think doesn't get enough attention in these conversations. I don't have myself a settled view. I'm torn up all over the place when it comes to an issue like abortion.
What do you mean by therapeutic abortion?
So, well, therapeutic abortion would be, for example, like extreme example would be an ectopic pregnancy, or let's say a case of rape or incest, an 11 or 12-year-old is impregnated by her uncle. That could qualify as a therapeutic abortion rather than an elective abortion.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
I actually think that the mental exercise there, I think it would be more apt to be like which would be less morally reprehensible, to bash the embryos with a bat, or to bash the 1-year-old with a bat, which one is more morally, I think that's more apt than which one would you save, because the act of abortion isn't about saving anything. The act of abortion is about destroying something. So,
well, that's not the point of the analogy, though. It's always important when you use an analogy to understand what the point being made is. So it's not meant to be relevant at the mode of death. It's meant to be relevant to illustrate the relative valuation of human beings at an embryonic stage versus at an infant stage.
Yeah, but I don't think it actually proves that. Like, I just don't think it does, just because there's all sorts of other factors in play.
So would you save the 100 embryos, or do you not know how you would respond? Because I would save the infant.
Well, I think most people would say they would save the infant not because they value the embryos less, but because the infant is right there, the easiest, and the one that has the most immediate connection in our brains, like you said, with the intuition. But intuition does not equate to ontological value. Like,
well, there's different intuitions. Like if it's a moral intuition that my obligation first is to save the infant, that's very significant. If you're saying it's just a subjective, non-rational response that you could easily dismiss, then yeah, you should save the 100 embryos as surely as the infant. But I think that's wrong. I think it is a moral intuition.
We can move on.
Yeah, I'd like to. I don't know if it's
I don't think
appropriate. I'd like to actually press that a little bit with you, Randall, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, so I've thought a lot about this particular analogy, and I think to myself, if I were to go in there and there was an infant versus the 100 fertilized embryos, I think I would save the infant. I think. I mean, hopefully it wouldn't be an either or. Maybe I could do a little bit of both, but I think I certainly would save the infant. And so I think there's some value in that analogy. I get the point, and I get the force of that. On the other hand, I also think that there's sort of I think intuition is valuable. I think when we reflect on our moral ideas. The only way we can really get moral information, other than perhaps sampling other moral agents out there, is to look internally at what affects us morally and how we think about all those things. So I think there's something strong in that. But I also think that I guess as a Christian, who believes in a God who designs life, who whether one is a theistic evolutionist or special creationist or whatever else, God intended for us to be somewhat as we are right now. I think there's sort of a design element into this, that it's good for me as an adult human being to look on an infant there and to recognize that I should protect that. Whereas it's somewhat abstract to think about what's inside of some test tubes or something like that. It's more an issue of what I am kind of geared up to recognize as life, as I am life. But that would be a separate question from the more academic question of what we come to understand actually is ontologically life, as I am life, which wouldn't seem as obvious just looking at a test tube versus looking at an infant. And so for that reason, I think I would say about that analogy that I think it gives some weight. I won't discount it. I think it's an important part of the discussion, but I do think that needs to be mentioned. That I think it. I think that the test tube idea, because of modern science and where we have arrived, gives me sort of a notion that is somewhat abstract compared to the child laying on the table in front of me. What do you think about that?
Look, because this issue is so polarized, I am happy at the very least for Christians having this conversation to recognize it's more complicated than we've sometimes appreciated. So we can have a reasonable disagreement about this. Our intuitions may be a little different. It's like, let's just not demonize people who disagree with us or have a different view on this issue. Because like just war versus pacifism, which is another huge issue that we talked about, I think Christians end up on different sides. And unfortunately, I don't think that's often appreciated in the evangelical subculture debate about abortion, because it is very often very black and white. But in terms of the value of life, I mean, earlier there was a discussion about the ethics of removing anybody who is an illegal. Well, so I'm wondering about the Trump government. There was a high-profile case in the last week or so about a 10-year-old girl who is an American citizen with brain cancer receiving treatment, who was deported along with her parents who were undocumented in the United States. And I'm wondering if you're perfectly comfortable with actions like that because the parents were illegal, or whether you think from a Christian lens we should ever have some sense of grace for these people in the application of laws and considering of their situation.
Yeah, I think that's an important question, and I get the notion that this is not so much a debate about abortion, and so maybe we need to move on a little bit from that. But I would just say I think that you rightly point to war and the illustration there. I would not want to send that person away without medical care. That's my intuition. And so, and that's also my Christian conviction. So I get something of that. When we're talking about life and death, the stakes are as high as they can possibly be outside of the spiritual domain and eternity and all those kind of things. And so when I think about, hey, let's have grace with people that disagree about this because this is highly complex. I agree, but what that kind of pushes me toward, Randall, is this notion that, and this is a very crude analogy, but let's say that there was a booth standing in the way of a doorway, and I needed to get through that doorway. My happiness in life, or whatever, is dependent upon my getting through that doorway. And inside of that booth that I can't see inside of, there may or may not be a human being. And this is, of course, kind of an analogy for, this may or may not be a person in the womb at, say, the earliest stages of development. So I could push a button and explode the booth, and it may or may not have a person inside of it. I don't know. I see us being in a situation where it's like, if it's that complex and we're unsure, then it seems like erring on the side of caution and not exploding the booth, that is to say, not carrying out an abortion, seems like the safest place to be. And for a Christian, I think they have strong motivations to see it that way. But even for a secularist who, let's say, we don't have to talk about how they account for morality or whatever else, but they I think they would recognize too the sort of thinking here that you can't be, particularly as a secularist, you can't be sure that this is what should constitute a person at, say, consciousness, or just before consciousness, or just after consciousness. And so it leads me to think that the safest, if we're putting the kind of the virtues of life versus liberty there in front of each other, it seems like life would win out. So I'll let that be my last comment on that, because I'm not a debater here. So I'll just let you have your say on that, and then we'll move on. But those are kind of some of the things that I think not only come up in my mind, but maybe some of those that are listening.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, I think we ought to definitely, well, I mean, I would apply this to the gradualist framework that I invoked earlier and say, the further you get into a pregnancy, the higher the stakes and the greater the warrant that would be required to do any harm to that organism, the human being developing in utero. I'm not convinced that a child who is raped, let's say, and if you could then prevent implantation through the use of a morning after pill or something, which would lead to the death of that child at the early embryonic stage, that is the same thing as terminating that child in the second or third trimester. And so I think you'd have much greater warrant to justify preventing a pregnancy or stopping a pregnancy, not knowing how the abortifacient / contraceptive might work. You'd have much greater warrant to do that soon into the pregnancy, let's say if a child was raped, to give an example of a therapeutic abortion.
Okay. All right, let's move on here, and maybe we can move a little more quickly through these without the host getting involved in the debate. Nitty says also, this is the second question and last question from Nitty, which is more Christian, if at all, funding alternative energy or increasing fossil fuel? Maybe Randall, will start with you since we started with Josh last time.
Well, I would be reluctant to say one or the other, because you kind of have to say, well, how effective are these alternate energies? But obviously, in terms of a stewardship model of creation, if you want ultimately to move toward a renewable and clean sources of energy, and so to encourage solar, wind, hydro, etc., that would be overall an advisable way to go. And I think we can't lose sight of the fact that through human-induced climate change is going to have an outsourced impact upon the poorest and most vulnerable populations on Earth, such as rising sea levels that will affect Bangladesh. So that certainly should be a part of the Christian calculation as well.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a false dilemma. In one sense, on my end, I don't think it's an either or. I do think we should. Alternative energies have not been as effective as fossil fuels of pulling, especially poor nations, out of poverty. So I definitely wouldn't want to limit that. At the same time, I do agree that there is something to be said of taking care of our world. We're supposed to be stewards of it, and so I think pursuing other forms of energy. In fact, I would like to see more investment in the developed world into nuclear energy, because I don't think it's as scary as Chernobyl makes it seem like it is, especially now, the decades and decades later, and that's clean energy. So,
all right, let's move on to this, and Josh, we'll let you go first on this one. What do you think about Trump recently terminating a program tracking mass abductions of Ukrainian children, good or bad from a Christian point of view?
Yeah, I hadn't heard about that, and I think it would be bad from a Christian point of view, depending on how it's presented here, but I don't know the ins and outs of it. So,
Yeah,
it's unfair to ask you to comment on something you haven't heard about. There could be nuance there that you don't know. Randall, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, so that was just reported in the last day. I know I read it in the Independent, and I know it's been probably reported elsewhere as well. So the U.S. has deleted information with respect to the tracking of children who were kidnapped into Russia from Ukraine. That is extremely concerning. And I don't have any reason to give Trump the benefit of the doubt. I think that what he's doing here is favoring Putin and removing incriminatory evidence against Putin and his regime. And it must be devastating. Just like in the first Trump administration with the child policy, where they were separating children from their parents to deter them from immigrating across the southern border. And some of those children still haven't been returned to their families. And as a parent, I can't imagine what it would be like to lose my child and then have the government functionally complicit in that kidnapping to the extent that they're deleting information about where they may be.
All right. Thank you, guys. Free Thinking Ministries. I'm assuming this is Tim Stratton, though I don't know for sure.
It's not me, I'll tell you.
Josh
I've been here.
Yeah, you're here, and there's only two of you, so far as I know, that are running that account. Josh has mentioned some points where he disagrees with Trump. I'd love to hear Randall point out a couple of points that he thinks Trump has done well. Randall, are you up to the task?
Yeah, so first of all, I do, again, I kind of refer to this in brief, but I want to commend Josh throughout for saying, yeah, I don't like that, I don't like that. And I think that is a great exercise, right? Because that helps us to become not too partisan. So I did give one passing that I would support in terms of the trans kids in sports, that I don't have a problem with Trump having taken a position on that and not giving government funding to that. So that's fair.
Josh, do you want to come back on that at all, or say anything in addition?
No, I just, I guess I just say that was the thing that came to my mind that Randall had said. So I remember him saying that during the conversation.
All right. Key Rift says, and thank you for that super chat. Thank you all for your super chats, if I haven't mentioned that. Assuming all illegal immigrants are full-fledged criminals, should a Christian and consequently loving nation do something other than dump them into another country for someone else to deal with? Josh, that seems kind of aimed at you, so we'll let you start with that.
Well, it depends. What do you mean by dumped in another country? Well, I think this is kind of a semantically loaded question here. I do think that illegal immigrants have broken a law, so a criminal law. It's not just a citation. It is either a misdemeanor or a felon, depending on how you do it. So I do think that there are ways to deport them, and I think there are ways to deport them rather than just dumping them in another country for someone else to deal with. I think you bring them to the country they came from illegally, and then they can make a living there. It's not like the country's dealing with them. It's now they are where they were. If they want to come to the United States, they can pursue the legal means.
Randall?
Yeah, that doesn't sound unreasonable at all, but that's certainly very different than the Trump administration this past week sending many Venezuelans to an Ecuadorian prison, private prison, and then just releasing them there and not providing them with any hearings and just claiming that they're all gang members, and we have no reason, no basis, I should say no way, to test the accuracy of those claims. One of the lawyers of one of those Venezuelans in the United States said they accused him of being a gang member simply because he had tattoos on his arm. He's not a gang member. He's a gay man who came to the United States as an art student who has tattoos, who has nothing to do with Venezuelan gangs. He was one of the people deported on Saturday night and sent to a private Ecuadorian prison. This does not sound like a proper way to deal with immigration in the manner that I agree with Josh just described.
You know, I'll take a bit of a moderator's privilege here and ask, is there anything do you guys want to talk about that for a moment, or should we leave that as it stands?
Talk about what Randall just...
Yeah, Randall's response to that. It sounded like maybe he came in with something that would be a point of discussion or important disagreement. Yeah,
I'd actually love to have a conversation on that, but I have to get home soon, so we should probably move on to other questions.
Well, fortunately for you who need to get home soon or get to the dinner table soon, this is the last question that I have here for you. And I want to thank you all again for the super chats here. Skinny Pete says, for guests, given that we do not live in a theocracy and our options are what they are, who do you think would be a better option for president right now? Now, I assume that question can only be a question between Trump and Kamala Harris. Of course, we had a whole debate on that, so I want to push you all back toward that debate. You can check it out on the channel. Just go to the live tab and scroll down. You'll see it there. But if either of you want to say anything about that, I'll kick it to Randall first.
Well, yeah. Clearly, I would think that Kamala Harris would be better than Donald Trump. But I would also say that even if you think she is the devil incarnate and that Trump is better than her, that should not allow you to become a partisan who can no longer critique the government, the current government. We should always maintain a prophetic critique. And I just want to reiterate, that's why I appreciate what Josh has said here in terms of some of his concerns. And he moved his grade from the Trump administration from a B to a B minus. So I would consider that progress at least.
I think I said B minus to B at the beginning, didn't I?
Okay.
But I think I then settled on the B minus. So we'll give that there. Yeah, and obviously I would take the other end. I will say that there are some things that I wish were different with this administration. That I was hoping we'd get. For me, the big thing is if you promise to release the Epstein files, let's just do it. I don't care who it incriminates, get it done. I don't protect the victims, absolutely. But I don't see why you're sitting on this thing. Knock off the moral preening and just get it done. So that's one of the biggest things to me. And I'll fully say it, if it incriminates people that are currently in the federal government in this administration, I would rather see it. So I'd throw it in, same with the last administration. But at the same time, I think it's difficult 2 months in to say because it is only 2 months. That's why the first 100 days are important, but they are only the first 100 days. But I do think that some of the stuff we've talked about today would not have happened if Harris was on the ticket, and I think would have been worse.
All right. Well, listen, let's close this down so that Josh can get where he needs to go. But real quickly, Josh, would you like to say anything to kind of wrap up what you've said today, kind of to encapsulate this discussion?
Yeah, I think when having discussions like this, it's actually very, very difficult to have these sorts of discussions because there's so much to discuss and so much information out there, and some of it may or may not be accurate. And the way Christians think about it, I do think needs to be biblically informed. And that doesn't mean you're going to have a cut and dried answer on every single issue either. So you're going to have to take what you believe is the most moral stance given the biblical evidence. And I believe that that's what I've tried to do here today. So,
Randall?
Well, first of all, I'll just say, I think one thing we should do to kind of get over the partisanship is to always apply. So, for example, if Trump raises hundreds of millions of dollars by selling Bitcoin cryptocurrency and pardons insurrectionists, then ask yourself, if Kamala Harris did that, or if Joe Biden had done that, would I be angry? And if so, then you ought to also be angry. You don't get exempted from that because it's just your guy or your political party. And of course, I have to do that as well. It's a discipline for all of us. We all have to be consistent. But that's one thing I'd want to say. The last thing I would just want to say is, I like you guys both very much. I very much enjoyed this conversation, and it is so toxic today. It's so hard for people just to not hate on one another when they disagree about political and social issues. So I think this has been a great exercise for me, not one where I now need to take a walk to cool off, but rather one where I say, that was really enjoyable. I had a good time. So thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way, Randall. And I'll just say to the rest of you all, thank you all so much for being here today. I want to thank both of our debaters. I appreciate their time here with us. Once again, I want to remind you that if you are a professing Christian, then what that entails is that you have a higher kingdom, you have a higher king, and you are a part of the city of God. And that means that whatever is going on in our world that we may want to be involved in because it's important, because it affects policy, it affects the people that we're trying to minister to, it affects us, that's going to be important to be politically active. But at the same time, we should look to not a president, not some earthly king, not some potentate, but our king, the king of all kings, the Lord Jesus Christ. Obviously, we're going to disagree about how to best live out what he wants us to do in this world, but our job is to strive for that, to believe what Jesus believed at the very base means what it is to be a Christian. And so with that, I thank all of you for being here. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you for your time. I hope you will think these things through. And with that, we'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.